The morning sun had just started to climb over the flat horizon of Fort Haven military base, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. The air smelled of oil, dust, and nervous energy, the kind that only existed when new recruits arrived. Trucks lined up near the gates, spilling out waves of fresh faces, young men and women, all wide-eyed and loud, each carrying the same mix of pride and fear beneath their freshly pressed uniforms. Among them was Private Jake Miller, barely 20, brimming with confidence. He had been captain of his high school football team and believed military life was just another test of strength and attitude. "It's all about showing who's boss," he whispered to his friend Danny as they marched toward the barracks. "Follow orders, flex when needed, and keep your head high. Easy." The recruits laughed, trying to mask their nerves with bravado. Their laughter filled the yard, sharp, careless, and youthful. Then the atmosphere shifted. From the far end of the training ground, a man approached slowly, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy, rhythmic sound. He wasn't tall, but there was something commanding about the way he carried himself. His uniform was older than the rest, the fabric slightly faded, the edges frayed from years of wear. His left sleeve bore a patch none of the recruits recognized, a dark, tattered insignia with a single silver emblem stitched across it. "Who's that?" Danny muttered under his breath. Jake squinted. "Must be one of the older trainers. Looks like he crawled out of a museum." A few recruits chuckled. They had no idea that the man walking toward them had once led soldiers through some of the harshest battlefields overseas. His name was Sergeant Raymond Cole, and he had served for more than 20 years. He was quiet, deliberate, and carried a kind of silence that only came from seeing too much and saying too little. Cole stopped near the flagpole, scanning the recruits with a calm gaze. His expression didn't change, not at their sloppy posture, not at their nervous chatter. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a truth only he understood. Without a word, he turned and began preparing his uniform for the upcoming inspection. It was a simple routine, one he'd done countless times. He removed his cap, set it neatly on the bench, and began brushing the dust off his jacket. Every motion was precise. He aligned his belt buckle perfectly, smoothed each crease on his sleeve, and polished his boots until they gleamed. He moved like a man who respected every thread of his uniform, as if each piece carried memory and meaning. The recruits, standing nearby, began to snicker. "Look at him," Jake whispered. "You'd think we were in a fashion show." "Yeah," another added. "Old man's polishing his ghost medals." The group laughed, their voices bouncing across the courtyard. Cole heard every word, but he didn't react. Not even a glance. He simply picked up a small rag, turned his sleeve slightly, and brushed over the old patch with care. The sunlight caught the faint silver thread, making it shimmer briefly before fading back into shadow. The laughter continued for a while longer, but eventually, even it began to feel out of place, too loud against Cole's quiet composure. Nearby, Lieutenant Ross, a younger officer who had trained under Cole years ago, watched the scene unfold. He didn't intervene. He just shook his head slightly, muttering under his breath, "They'll learn soon enough." Cole finished his uniform preparations and stood up straight. His posture was perfect, not stiff but strong, as if every bone had been molded by discipline itself. He looked around the base, the buildings, the training field, the flag swaying gently in the morning breeze, and for a brief moment his eyes softened. Memories flickered behind them, faces of men long gone, the sound of gunfire in foreign soil, the smell of smoke and iron. The patch on his sleeve wasn't just a decoration. It was a symbol of survival, of pain, courage, and loss. He took a deep breath and turned back toward the recruits, who were now half listening, half distracted. "Formation," he said quietly, his voice steady but firm. The recruits hesitated. His tone wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like steel. They scrambled into position. For the first time, Jake noticed something different. The way the older soldiers nodded respectfully when Cole passed by. Even the base captain greeted him with a firm handshake, something Jake hadn't seen happen to any other sergeant. But still, his arrogance lingered. Respect doesn't mean anything if you can't keep. He muttered to Danny. Bet he's too old to run a mile. What Jake didn't know was that Sergeant Cole had once carried a wounded man across 2 miles of enemy ground without stopping. When the drill began, the recruits struggled, dropping during push-ups, panting after short runs, fumbling with weapon drills. Cole didn't shout like other instructors. He simply walked among them, correcting posture, showing the right stance, and offering quiet advice. His patience was unnerving. "Discipline isn't noise," he said once, adjusting a recruit's grip. "It's consistency." His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made everyone listen, even Jake, who pretended not to care. Later that afternoon, after drills, Cole sat by himself under the shade of an old oak tree, taking off his boots and cleaning them again. Jake passed by, smirking. "You really think the general cares about shiny boots?" he asked, half mocking. Cole looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than the sky. "I don't polish for the general," he replied quietly. "I do it for the men who didn't make it back to polish theirs." Jake froze, unsure how to respond. For a moment, he saw something behind the veteran's calm, a sorrow that didn't need words. That night, the barracks buzzed with jokes and stories. But Jake stayed unusually silent, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Cole had said. Somewhere deep inside, a small crack formed in his pride, one that would grow wider with time. Meanwhile, outside, Sergeant Cole stood alone on the parade ground, looking at the moonlight reflecting off the flag. He straightened his uniform once more, his hand brushing that same faded patch. He whispered a name under his breath, one no one else would ever hear. The recruits had laughed that morning, but by the time inspection day arrived, laughter would no longer come so easily. They were about to learn that real strength wasn't found in youth or confidence, but in quiet honor worn on an old soldier's sleeve. The next morning came earlier than expected. The bugle screamed through the still dawn, echoing off the metal roofs of the barracks. The recruits rolled from their bunks, groaning and fumbling for boots. Dust floated through the air, glittering in the pale light as they scrambled to line up for inspection drills. Jake Miller was one of the first out. His confidence hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown. "Today's the day we show them what real soldiers look like," he boasted, slapping Danny on the shoulder. "And maybe that old guy'll learn a thing or two from us." Danny laughed, half awake. "Man, you've got to stop talking about that sergeant. He doesn't even look at us." "That's the point," Jake replied. "He acts like he's better than everyone. Just because he's been around longer doesn't mean he's still got it." Across the yard, Sergeant Raymond Cole was already up, long before the recruits. His uniform hung from his bunk, pressed and clean. The faded patch on his left arm, the same one that drew whispers and laughter the day before, seemed almost to glow in the soft morning light. Cole moved with unhurried precision, folding his bedding, adjusting his belt, brushing his shoes until they gleamed like mirrors. Every motion was silent, practiced, respectful, the kind of discipline that didn't come from fear of authority, but from devotion to it. When he stepped outside, the recruits were just forming their lines, half sloppy, half joking. The early chill of dawn carried the sound of their laughter, sharp, youthful, and mocking. "There he is again," Jake said, smirking. "Mr. Museum exhibit." Cole paused at the edge of the courtyard, eyes sweeping over the group, but said nothing. His gaze was calm, almost peaceful. He moved past them, heading toward the inspection area. Jake couldn't resist. "Hey, Sergeant," he called, pretending to salute. "You missed a spot on your antique collection." A few recruits burst out laughing. Danny snorted, trying to hide it. Cole turned slightly, just enough to meet Jake's eyes. For a moment, something unreadable flickered in them. Not anger, not shame. Something deeper, something that made Jake's grin falter. Then Cole simply nodded once. "Make sure your own boots are clean, son," he said quietly, and walked away. The laughter faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Later that morning, drills began. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist, and sweat soon soaked every uniform. Sergeant Cole watched from the sidelines, his expression calm but focused. When a recruit's form slipped, he corrected them, not with a shout, but with a gesture. "Back straight," he'd say softly. "Feet firm. Breathe steady. You're not just moving, you're building control." His voice carried authority without volume. The recruits couldn't understand how someone could command so much respect with so few words. Jake, however, mistook that quietness for weakness. "Bet he can't even raise his voice," Jake muttered, panting as he ran past Danny during laps. Probably too tired. But by the fifth lap, Jake was the one gasping, while Cole, nearly 30 years older, jogged beside them effortlessly, his breathing steady. When the drill ended, the recruits collapsed in the shade, gulping water and complaining. Cole walked past, still upright, his hands clasped behind his back. "You can always tell who trains for approval," he said mildly, "and who trains for survival." Jake frowned, unsure if the comment was aimed at him, but deep down, it stung. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the base in amber light, Cole sat on the same bench near the flagpole, methodically preparing for the next day's inspection. He laid out his jacket, brushing it carefully, paying special attention to the patch. The recruits gathered nearby, watching from the barracks porch. "There he goes again," Danny whispered. "What's the deal with that patch anyway?" Jake shrugged. "Probably something from decades ago. Some old training badge or whatever. Still," Danny said, "he treats it like it's gold." Jake leaned back, smirking. "Yeah, maybe he's clinging to the only thing he's ever done right." The words came out sharp, louder than he intended. The other recruits chuckled nervously, but no one else joined in. The laughter that once sounded harmless now echoed uncomfortably across the yard. Cole didn't respond. He continued polishing the patch, his movements slow and deliberate. When he was done, he set his brush aside and looked out toward the sunset. His eyes softened, not from sadness, but memory. He could still hear the cries, the orders shouted through static-filled radios, the whistle of bullets overhead. He could still feel the sand beneath his hands as he crawled toward the last surviving man of his unit, refusing to leave him behind. The patch on his sleeve had been awarded after that mission. Operation Iron Vow, a name that still burned in his mind. 6 men went in. Only one walked out. That patch wasn't just recognition. It was a reminder, a promise that their memory would not be forgotten, no matter how faded the cloth became. As Cole sat there lost in thought, the barracks door creaked open behind him. It was Lieutenant Ross. "You still keep it that clean?" he asked quietly, stepping beside him. Cole gave a faint smile. "It's not for show." Ross nodded, lowering his voice. "They don't understand, you know. They're just kids." "I know," Cole said simply. "That's why I don't take it personal." Ross studied him for a moment. "You could tell them. About Iron Vow, about what that patch means." Cole shook his head. "No need. Some things are better learned through silence than through stories." Inside the barracks, Jake sat by his bunk. still half laughing about the old man and his patch, but something about Cole's composure bothered him. There was no anger, no embarrassment. It was as if nothing the recruits said mattered. That kind of quiet confidence was unsettling, almost intimidating. Danny noticed Jake's distant look. "You all right?" Jake shrugged. "Yeah, I just don't get him. If people laughed at me like that, I'd say something. But he doesn't even blink." "Maybe he's just used to it," Danny said. Jake frowned. "Or maybe he's hiding something." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. The sound of Cole's boots echoed faintly outside as the veteran made his last round before lights out. Jake turned over and stared at the ceiling, the laughter of the day replaying in his head. Only this time, it didn't sound as funny. The following morning, a notice went up. General Harris would be visiting for a full inspection in 3 days. Panic spread through the barracks. Uniforms were suddenly scrubbed spotless, and boots shined so hard they reflected the light. Everyone wanted to impress the general. Everyone except Sergeant Cole, who carried on as calmly as ever. He spent that evening preparing like he always did, quietly, carefully, reverently. The same patch, the same jacket, the same steady hands. From across the yard, Jake watched him through the window. For the first time, he didn't laugh. There was something almost sacred about the way Cole treated his uniform. "Man," Danny whispered, "what's with you lately?" "You're quiet." Jake didn't answer. He just kept watching the old sergeant in the fading light, a strange mix of curiosity and guilt twisting in his chest. He didn't know why, but something told him that Patch meant more than he could ever imagine. The laughter that once filled Fort Haven began to fade, replaced by murmurs of curiosity. The recruits still didn't know who Sergeant Cole really was, or what that patch represented. But soon they would find out. And when they did, none of them would ever look at him, or the meaning of respect, the same way again. The following day dawned gray and cool, a rare break from the usual heat at Fort Haven. A soft breeze rolled through the barracks, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass. The recruits were restless. The upcoming inspection by General Harris was all anyone could talk about. Rumors spread like wildfire. "He's brutal," one whispered. "If your bootlaces aren't tied the same way, you're done." Another said, "I heard he once sent an entire platoon back to training just for missing a button." Jake Miller sat at the edge of his bunk, rubbing polish onto his boots. His hands moved mechanically, but his mind wasn't on the inspection. It was on Sergeant Cole. For days, the old man's quiet presence had bothered him. He didn't shout like the others. He didn't rush or boast. He simply was steady, calm, immovable. Jake didn't understand it. He was used to men proving their worth with loud voices and visible strength, not with silence. When Cole walked past, even the lieutenants seemed to straighten without thinking. No one mocked him anymore, though no one had apologized either. The laughter that once echoed across the yard had dissolved into a strange, uneasy respect, a respect born not from understanding, but from confusion. Jake decided he needed answers. That afternoon, while most recruits were polishing belts and scrubbing the floor, Jake slipped into the records room near the administration wing. The small office smelled of dust and paper, lined with file cabinets marked by decades of history. He scanned the labels: personnel archives, service records, combat reports. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled open one of the drawers labeled Cole Raymond S. The file was thick, filled with yellowed papers, commendations, and reports typed in faded ink. Jake flipped through them quickly until one caught his eye. Operation Iron Vow minus 2013 deployment report. Status: classified. Partial declassification. Medal of Valor citation. Summary: Sergeant Raymond Cole, sole surviving member of the Iron Vow unit, rescued 6 wounded soldiers under direct enemy fire, refusing evacuation. Awarded Silver Star and Iron Vow insignia patch. Jake's eyes widened. He read the paragraph again, slower this time. Sole surviving member. The patch. The same patch they had mocked. The same patch he had called a relic. He felt something shift inside him. Shame, awe, confusion all tangled together. He slipped the paper back into the file and closed the drawer quietly. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he walked out into the sunlight. Outside, Sergeant Cole was standing near the training field, helping a new recruit fix his rifle grip. The younger soldier looked nervous, but Cole's voice was calm, patient, fatherly. Jake watched from a distance. The veteran moved like a man who had nothing to prove, like someone who'd already given everything once and had come back with only memories and a patch to show for it. For the first time, Jake didn't see an old soldier. He saw a man who had lived through what others only trained for. That evening, the tension in the camp thickened. Every recruit was obsessing over their uniforms, checking buttons, shining metal buckles until their fingers ached. Even the air felt charged. Sergeant Cole, as always, was composed. He walked through the barracks with quiet authority, inspecting without speaking. When he stopped by Jake's bunk, Jake straightened instinctively. Cole looked over his uniform, then at his face. Nervous? Jake hesitated. A bit, sir. Just want to make a good impression. Cole gave a small nod. Then focus on your conduct, not your shine. Jake frowned. Sir? Cole smiled faintly. A uniform can look perfect, but discipline shows in silence, in how you stand, how you listen, how you lead. Jake didn't respond. The words lingered in his mind long after Cole had walked away. Later that night, the barracks lights dimmed. Most recruits tried to sleep, but the anxiety before inspection kept them awake. Jake lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The words Iron Vow replayed in his head like a drumbeat. He imagined the battlefield described in the report, the noise, the chaos, the fear, and a single man refusing to leave others behind. What kind of strength did that take? He turned toward the window and saw Cole again, sitting on a bench under the floodlight, cleaning his boots as always. The silver thread on his patch glimmered faintly under the glow. The man barely moved. Only his hands worked in slow, practiced rhythm. Jake couldn't help but wonder what ghosts visited him when he sat alone like that. The next morning brought a sharp wind and a heavy sky. The base felt unusually quiet. The general's visit was only a day away. Training was shorter than usual, but the pressure was higher. Every command echoed louder. Every mistake drew harsher correction. During drill practice, Jake found himself falling behind. His focus was off, not from laziness, but from distraction. He couldn't stop glancing at Cole. At one point, he tripped during formation, drawing a few chuckles from the others. Before the laughter spread, Cole stepped forward. Miller, he said firmly, start again. Jake stood, brushing dust from his uniform, his cheeks burning. Yes, sir. Cole's tone softened. You'll trip 100 times before you learn to march steady. What matters is how you stand after you fall. It wasn't a scolding. It was advice. And for reasons Jake couldn't explain, those words struck deeper than any insult could. From that moment, he started to watch Cole differently, not as someone outdated, but as someone carved by experience. That evening, as the recruits gathered in the mess hall, whispers began again, but this time not mocking. I heard he's a war hero, one said. Yeah, my cousin said he saved a whole team overseas, another added. Why doesn't he talk about it then? Someone else asked. Jake stayed quiet, staring into his tray. He already knew why. Men like Cole didn't brag, because their stories were written in blood. When the meal ended, Jake approached Cole outside. The sergeant was standing near the flagpole, as he often did, watching the sky turn dark. "Sergeant?" Jake said cautiously. Cole turned. "Yes, Miller?" Jake hesitated. "That patch, it's from Iron Vow, right?" For the first time, Cole's expression shifted. His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. "You've been reading," he said quietly. I just wanted to know what it meant." Cole looked down at the patch for a moment before replying. "It's a reminder of duty, of loss, of promises kept." Jake nodded slowly, unsure what else to say. The silence between them felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Finally, Cole added, "You can read reports all you want, but you'll never find the whole story there. Some things can't be written down." Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving Jake standing there, the night wind tugging at his collar. By the time Jake returned to the barracks, something inside him had changed. The arrogance was still there, but quieter now, tempered by something new: respect. He didn't laugh when Cole passed anymore. He didn't join in when others made jokes. Instead, he started mimicking the veteran's habits, aligning his gear neatly, brushing his boots carefully, paying attention to small details. The others noticed. "You turning into Cole Jr., or what?" Danny teased one night. Jake just smiled faintly. Maybe it's time we learned from someone who's actually earned his patch. As the night before the inspection settled in, the base was silent. Only the wind whispered through the training yard. Inside his room, Sergeant Cole stood in front of a cracked mirror, adjusting his collar one final time. His hands brushed over the patch once more, his reflection catching the faint shimmer of silver thread. "Still with me," he murmured under his breath. "Always." Outside, Jake watched him through the window, and though he didn't know who they were, he could sense it was about something far greater than himself. Tomorrow, when the general arrived, everything would change. The morning of the inspection dawned with a sky the color of steel, pale, cold, and utterly still. The air at Fort Haven buzzed with tension. Every recruit felt it, the kind of pressure that seemed to wrap around the lungs, making each breath deliberate. For most of them, this was their first inspection under a commanding general. For one man, Sergeant Raymond Cole, it was just another day he'd promised himself to get through quietly. The courtyard gleamed from the early cleaning. The flag fluttered lazily in the wind as recruits lined up in perfect formation. Every boot was polished to a mirror shine, every belt buckle aligned, and every nervous recruit prayed that no dust had dared touch their uniform. Among the rows stood Private Jake Miller, chest puffed out, hands gripping his rifle so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. He had spent hours the previous night preparing, desperate to stand out, not just as another recruit, but as one of the best. Deep down, though, something else gnawed at him, an uneasiness he couldn't name. It had started ever since Sergeant Cole's quiet words echoed in his head. "I don't polish for the general. I do it for the men who didn't make it back." Jake had laughed it off in front of others. But when he looked at the patch on Cole's sleeve, something inside him had shifted, a silent, uncomfortable respect that he couldn't quite admit. Across the yard, Sergeant Cole stood still, inspecting his small squad one last time. He adjusted one recruit's collar, straightened another's posture, and offered a few quiet words of encouragement. His movements were efficient, deliberate, yet gentle, the kind of calm only experience could shape. He didn't bark orders or pace with irritation like the younger sergeants. Instead, he radiated a quiet confidence that made the recruits in his squad stand just a little taller. The sound of an approaching convoy shattered the silence. Engines roared in the distance, growing louder until 3 black military vehicles rolled into the courtyard. The chatter stopped instantly. Every soldier snapped into position. From the lead vehicle stepped General Nathaniel Briggs, a towering figure known across the division for his sharp discipline and sharper eyes. Rumor said he could spot a wrinkle in a uniform from 50 yards away. Following him were several high-ranking officers, including Colonel Hughes and a few inspectors from headquarters. "Attention!" Lieutenant Ross's voice echoed across the yard. Every recruit froze. The general began his slow walk down the line, boots clicking sharply against the pavement. His eyes scanned every uniform, every button, every trembling face. When he passed, it felt like the air itself held its breath. He stopped occasionally, to adjust a sleeve, to frown at a scuffed boot, to question a recruit on regulation numbers. Each time, the soldiers prayed he wouldn't stop at them. When he reached Jake's line, the young man's heart pounded so hard he thought it might give him away. The general's shadow loomed over him. "Name? Private Jake Miller, sir." "Your posture's good, Private," the general said, inspecting him closely. "But your belt? Off-center by a fraction." Jake swallowed. "Sir, yes, sir." "Fix it." Jake obeyed immediately, his hands trembling. The general moved on, without another word. The inspection continued, each click of his boots echoing louder in the recruit's ears. The courtyard had turned into a sea of silent tension, until the general stopped abruptly near the far end of the line. He was standing in front of Sergeant Cole. At first, no one understood why. Cole's uniform, though old, was immaculate. His boots gleamed like black glass, his belt perfectly aligned, his cap pressed in position to regulation. But what caught the general's attention wasn't the polish or the perfection. It was the patch on Cole's sleeve. The air grew heavier. Even the wind seemed to still. General Briggs narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. His expression softened, just slightly, as recognition flickered across his face. "Sergeant," he said slowly, "that patch, you still wear it?" Cole nodded once. "Yes, sir, always." A long silence followed. The younger officers behind the general exchanged confused glances, but Briggs didn't explain. Instead, he stepped back, looking the older man over, not inspecting him, but acknowledging him. Then he turned to the surrounding recruits. "Do any of you know what that patch stands for?" His voice boomed, deep and commanding. No one answered. The recruits shifted uneasily, their eyes darting toward the patch, a simple, faded insignia with a silver emblem stitched through it. Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his earlier laughter like a stone in his gut. Briggs let the silence hang for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "That patch belongs to the 5th Recon Unit, Ghost Division, a classified group that operated behind enemy lines during the Arden Ridge campaign. Fewer than 10 men from that unit made it home." His voice lowered, rough with emotion. Sergeant Cole was one of them. The recruits stood frozen. The name Ghost Division echoed in their minds, a name they'd only heard whispered in old stories, half legend, half nightmare. A unit sent into impossible missions, where the chance of survival was almost none. General Briggs stepped closer to Cole, his tone softer now. "I remember that unit," he said. "You were under Captain Rivers, weren't you?" "Yes, sir," Cole replied quietly. "He didn't make it back." The general nodded slowly, a shadow passing through his expression. "No, he didn't." Then he turned back to the recruits, his gaze hardening again. "You laughed at this man, didn't you? Some of you thought his uniform was outdated, his ways old-fashioned." His voice cracked like thunder. "But this man has stood where most of you couldn't even imagine standing, and still came back with honor." A wave of shame rippled through the ranks. Jake felt it most of all. His throat tightened, and his mind flashed with the memory of his cruel laughter, of his arrogance. Now, Looking at the quiet veteran standing tall before the general, he realized just how small he'd been. Cole said nothing. He stood motionless, eyes forward, as if the general's words weren't for him at all. His face didn't show pride or embarrassment, only calm acceptance. "Carry on, Sergeant," the general said finally, giving a firm salute. "It's good to see that patch still has meaning." Cole returned the salute silently, his voice low but steady. "It always will, sir." The general nodded once, then continued down the line. But the recruits could no longer focus. Their thoughts spun around one image, the faded patch, gleaming softly in the morning light. The laughter that once surrounded Cole now felt like a distant echo of shame. When the inspection ended, the general addressed the entire base. "Discipline is not about perfection," he said. "It's about respect for the uniform, for those who came before, and for the ones who never came back. Remember that?" The recruits dispersed slowly, their earlier pride stripped away. Some looked at Sergeant Cole with new eyes. Not pity, not awe, but respect. Others couldn't meet his gaze at all. As the courtyard emptied, Jake approached him hesitantly. His voice was low, uncertain. "Sergeant?" "I didn't know." Cole glanced at him, expression unreadable. "You weren't supposed to," he said simply. "You're supposed to learn." Then he walked away, quiet as always, leaving Jake standing there, the lesson burning deeper than any drill or command could ever teach. The day after the inspection, Fort Haven felt different. The morning routines were the same. The whistle at dawn, the echo of boots, the clatter of rifles and mess trays. But the energy had shifted. Where laughter and arrogance once filled the barracks, silence and respect now lived. The recruits no longer saw Sergeant Raymond Cole as the old-timer polishing ghosts. He was something else now, a man who carried the weight of history, who had faced everything they were only beginning to imagine. The patch on his sleeve wasn't just a piece of fabric anymore. It was a reminder that experience was a battlefield all its own. Even the usually cocky Private Jake Miller had changed. He no longer cracked jokes about Cole or his habits. The memory of the general's words, "This man has stood where most of you couldn't even imagine standing," echoed in his mind every time he laced his boots. That morning, Cole entered the training yard earlier than usual. He stood in the center of the empty field, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the first light of dawn stretched across the sky. The air was cool, crisp, and quiet, just the way he liked it. He thought about the inspection, about the way the general had recognized the patch, and about the young faces that had watched in silence. It wasn't pride he felt. It was responsibility. He had never cared for recognition. He cared only that the lessons he carried didn't die with him. The recruits arrived a few minutes later, lined up neatly. Their voices were softer now, their movements more deliberate. When Cole turned to face them, they snapped to attention almost instinctively. "Good morning, Sergeant." They shouted in unison. Cole nodded, his eyes scanning the line. "Morning. Let's start with a 2-mile run. And this time," he paused, his voice calm, but firm, "you'll run with your partner's pace, not against it. If someone falls behind, you don't finish until they do." A few recruits exchanged glances. This wasn't the kind of order they were used to. Usually, training was about being faster, stronger, louder. But Cole's rules were different. They had meaning beneath the sweat. The whistle blew, and they started. The first lap was easy for the stronger ones like Jake. But as the pace grew harder, some recruits began to fall back. Instinctively, Jake surged ahead, but then he remembered Cole's words, "You don't finish until they do." He slowed down, falling back beside Private Daniel Lopez, who was struggling to breathe. "Come on, man," Jake said, gripping his arm. "We finish this together." Cole watched quietly from a distance, his expression unreadable. He didn't bark or cheer. He simply observed, noting how the recruits began to look out for one another. One by one, they started to match pace, carrying the slower ones forward. When the last group crossed the finish line, sweating and gasping for air, Cole finally spoke. "That," he said simply, "is what we used to call survival." He let the words settle before continuing. "The strongest soldier isn't the one who finishes first. It's the one who makes sure no one gets left behind." For the first time, the recruits didn't roll their eyes. They listened. Every word came from somewhere real, somewhere heavy, and they could feel it. That afternoon, Cole led a field exercise in the woods surrounding the base. It was supposed to be a simple navigation drill, but with Cole, nothing was ever just simple. He divided them into small teams, giving each a map and compass. "Your objective is to reach Camp Echo," he said. "You'll find it 2 miles east. But remember, maps lie if you don't read them right, and compasses don't care about your confidence." Jake's team set off first. He was the one holding the compass, confident as always. "We head straight east," he said, leading the group down a narrow path. But an hour later, they found themselves at a dead end, a creek they weren't supposed to cross. "Great job, Captain," one of the recruits muttered. "We're lost." Jake frowned, checking the map again. That's when a calm voice came from behind them. "Confidence is good," Cole said, emerging from the trees, hands clasped behind his back. "But arrogance gets men killed." The recruits straightened immediately. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but Cole gestured for silence. He pointed at the map. "You see that ridge line?" Jake nodded. "Yes, Sergeant. That's north. You followed the sun instead of your bearings. Happens when you think you already know where you're going." He handed the map back, his eyes steady on Jake's. "Now find your way." Together this time. The lesson hit deeper than Jake expected. It wasn't about maps. It was about leadership and humility. As they corrected their course and finally reached Camp Echo, the weight of Cole's guidance began to make sense. He wasn't teaching them how to pass drills. He was teaching them how to survive, how to trust, how to endure, and how to respect the men beside them. Over the next week, a quiet transformation swept through the recruits. Laughter returned, but it wasn't mocking anymore. It was shared. They began helping each other without being asked, cleaning gear together, and listening when Cole spoke. Even the younger sergeants started observing his methods. Lieutenant Ross noticed the change and pulled Cole aside one evening. "You've done something I couldn't," Ross said with a half-smile. "You've turned them from recruits into soldiers." Cole shrugged. "They just needed to see what the uniform really means." Ross looked at him thoughtfully. "And what does it mean to you after all these years?" Cole's eyes drifted toward the setting sun. "It means carrying the memory of those who can't wear it anymore." The lieutenant nodded quietly. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. One night, as rain poured over the base, Jake sat on his bunk, cleaning his rifle in silence. Across the room, Cole sat at his desk, carefully folding an old letter. The recruits had finished their day's training, but Jake couldn't shake his curiosity anymore. "Sergeant," he said hesitantly, "that patch? The Ghost Division 1. Were you the only one from your team who made it back?" Cole didn't answer at first. The rain filled the silence between them. Then he said softly, "No, there were 2 of us. The other didn't make it long after." Jake hesitated. "Were you close?" Cole looked up, eyes distant. "He was like a brother. Saved my life more times than I can count. That's why I still polish the uniform. It's my way of keeping him alive." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. For a moment, the age gap, the rank, the walls of formality They all disappeared. He wasn't looking at a sergeant anymore. He was looking at a man who'd seen the worst of the world and still found a way to stand tall. "Thank you," Jake said quietly. Cole gave a faint smile. "Don't thank me, Miller. Just remember." By the end of that week, the recruits weren't the same. The laughter that once mocked now bonded. The arrogance that once blinded now steadied. And the man they had laughed at, the veteran with the faded patch, had become their example. But the lessons weren't over. The next challenge waiting for them wasn't a drill, a march, or a test. It was real, something that would force every one of them to prove what they had learned under the quiet eyes of a soldier who had already lived through it all. It was just past midnight when Fort Haven woke to chaos. The alarm sirens split the night air like knives, their piercing cry echoing across the base. Lights flickered on in the barracks, boots hit the floor, and confused shouts filled the dark. "Fire in the West Hangar!" A voice bellowed through the intercom. "All available personnel report immediately." Jake Miller jolted upright, his heart hammering. He pulled on his uniform, half-buttoned, and grabbed his gear. The recruits scrambled around him, fear and adrenaline mixing into one explosive rush. In all the weeks of training, they'd never faced something real. Not like this. Outside, the night glowed orange in the distance. Flames clawed at the sky from the direction of the maintenance hangar. Thick smoke rolled across the yard, the air tasting of burning oil and metal. Trucks roared past as emergency crews rushed toward the fire, but it was spreading too fast. "Move!" Sergeant Cole's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. He stood at the center of the courtyard, calm amid the storm. Even under the flickering red lights, his posture didn't waver. "Grab extinguishers. Line up by squad. No one acts alone." The recruits obeyed without hesitation. Weeks ago, they might have stumbled, argued, or questioned. But now, instinctively, they moved with precision, just like he had taught them. Jake joined his squad, extinguisher in hand. Fear clawed at his chest, but Cole's steady tone anchored him. The veteran moved ahead of them, assessing the scene with eyes that had seen too many nights like this before. The West Hangar was a mess. A fuel leak had caught fire, igniting one of the storage areas where spare equipment and machinery were kept. The heat was unbearable, waves of it pulsing outward. Sparks rained from the steel roof like fiery snow. Cole barked out orders. "Lopez, take 3 men. Control the left perimeter. Jake, you're with me. We'll secure the south entrance." Jake nodded, adrenaline coursing through him. "Yes, Sergeant." They ran through the smoke, coughing but determined. Cole led the way, keeping low, moving with the kind of calm that came from experience, not bravery. When a section of burning beam crashed near them, Jake flinched, but Cole didn't even hesitate. "Stay low. Keep breathing through your sleeve," he ordered. "Don't panic. Fire feeds on fear." The recruits around him followed, their movements tight and controlled. Cole's voice became their rhythm, his orders their heartbeat. As they reached the south entrance, they found 2 maintenance workers trapped inside, struggling to pull free a jammed door. Flames danced along the edges of the frame, threatening to swallow them whole. "Help us," one of them shouted, his voice hoarse. Cole didn't hesitate. "Jake, with me." They grabbed a metal bar and forced it into the gap. Heat scorched their faces as they heaved together. For a second, it felt impossible, but then the door gave way with a metallic shriek. The workers stumbled out, coughing and crying. "Get them to the medics," Cole ordered. Jake helped drag one of the men out toward safety. When he turned back, Cole was still inside, checking if anyone else was left. "Sergeant," Jake yelled, choking on the smoke. "We've got to go." Cole didn't move right away. He was staring at something, an old photo taped to a locker, half burned. It showed a group of soldiers from years ago, men from the Ghost Division, smiling in their youth. For a moment, the veteran froze, eyes clouded by memory. Then he tore the picture off the locker, folded it, and tucked it into his chest pocket. "All right," he said softly. "Let's go." They stumbled out together, collapsing onto the gravel as medics rushed past. The hangar roof gave one final groan before part of it caved in, sending sparks and debris flying. But thanks to Cole's direction, no one else was inside. The fire crews worked through the night until the flames finally surrendered to exhaustion. Smoke lingered like ghosts over the blackened ruins, and the first light of dawn revealed the damage. Dozens of recruits sat on the ground, soot-covered and shaken. Some had burns, others small injuries, but all were alive. Jake sat beside Lopez, staring at his trembling hands. He couldn't believe what they'd just survived. "If he hadn't been there," he said quietly, "we'd have lost half the hangar, maybe lives." Lopez nodded, his face streaked with ash. "That man doesn't flinch. Like he's been through worse." Jake looked up, and there Cole stood, still wearing that faded patch, his uniform burned in places, but his stance steady. The general himself approached, surrounded by officers. "Report," General Briggs said. Cole straightened. "Fire's out, sir. 2 injured, no fatalities." The general looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Your leadership tonight saved this base. I'll see that it's noted in the report." Cole shook his head. "No need, sir. They did it, the recruits. They followed through." Briggs studied him, then smiled faintly. Still humble after all these years. The general turned to the recruits gathered nearby. "You should all understand what you witnessed tonight," he said, voice echoing through the yard. "Courage isn't loud. It's calm. It's steady. It looks like Sergeant Cole." There was no applause, just silence, heavy and reverent. When the general left, Jake walked toward Cole, still clutching his gloves. "Sergeant," he began, voice low, "how did you know exactly what to do?" Cole looked at the smoldering wreck of the hangar for a long moment before answering. "You don't forget what fire teaches you. Not when you've seen it before." Jake hesitated. "Overseas?" Cole nodded slowly. "Different fire. Same fear." He turned to face Jake, eyes softening. "You kept your head. That's what matters. Fear doesn't make you weak. Letting it lead you does." Jake swallowed hard. He'd been terrified, but he hadn't frozen. He'd listened, followed, acted. And for the first time, he understood what Cole had been teaching them all along. Discipline isn't about control. It's about clarity when the world is falling apart. That morning, as the sun rose over the charred remains of the hangar, Cole gathered his squad. His voice was quiet, almost tired. "You all did well," he said. "You worked together. You remembered what I told you. No one finishes until everyone's safe. That's what makes a unit. That's what makes soldiers." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Jake stepped forward. "Sergeant, we used to laugh at you. We thought you were just some old vet trying to relive his glory days." Cole looked at him, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "And now?" Jake's throat tightened. "Now, I think. We're lucky you're here." Cole didn't reply. He just nodded, eyes distant, perhaps at ghosts only he could see. As the recruits dispersed, he reached into his pocket and unfolded the half-burned photograph. The faces smiled up at him, younger, fearless, alive. He ran a thumb across the image, brushing off soot. "Still keeping your promise, Captain," he whispered. Then he folded it again, placed it back over his heart, and walked toward the barracks, his silhouette framed by the first golden light of day. That night had burned more than just a hangar. It had burned away arrogance, ignorance, and doubt, leaving behind something stronger, respect forged in fire. Days after the hangar fire, Fort Haven was quieter than usual. The immediate danger had passed, but the energy among the recruits was different, a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and anticipation. Everyone knew the general's official evaluation of the unit was imminent. Even the youngest recruits walked with a newfound confidence. Their routines had become disciplined, precise, and most importantly, team-oriented. Under Sergeant Raymond Cole's quiet guidance, they had learned more than drills. They had learned trust, responsibility, and resilience. Jake Miller noticed it most in himself. He had once been brash and impatient, always seeking the spotlight. Now, his focus had shifted. He observed, supported, and anticipated the needs of those around him. He still felt the old thrill of competition, but it no longer dominated his thoughts. The echo of Cole's lessons, "No one finishes until everyone's safe," guided every decision he made. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the barracks shadows stretched across the yard, Cole called Jake aside. "Miller, come with me," he said quietly. They walked to the edge of the training field, far from the others. The air was crisp, the faint scent of pine and earth hanging over them. Cole's gaze was distant, lost in thought. "I want to show you something," he said finally. Jake's curiosity spiked. He followed the sergeant to an old storage shed near the perimeter of the base. Inside, it was dusty, filled with old crates and crates of military surplus. Cole approached a corner and pulled out a small wooden box, worn by time and handling. He opened it carefully, revealing a collection of medals, letters, and photographs. Jake recognized some of the ribbons and badges from military history classes, but others were unfamiliar, foreign, symbols of courage and sacrifice that textbooks could never capture. Cole handed him a photograph. It showed a group of soldiers in the heat of battle, dirt and sweat streaking their faces, eyes focused and determined. "These men," he said, voice low, "were my team in the Arden Ridge campaign. We called ourselves Ghost Division. Few made it back. Fewer survived the next mission." Jake swallowed, unable to speak. Is this why you wear the patch?" Cole nodded. "Yes, every day I put this uniform on, I remember them. I remember the promise I made, to never forget, and to never allow anyone under my command to be unprepared for what's coming." Jake's chest tightened. He had spent weeks watching the sergeant quietly, admiring his discipline, his calm presence, but he hadn't understood the weight behind it. Now, seeing the faces of men who would never return, the meaning became painfully clear. Cole's eyes softened. "You all laughed at me at first. That's natural. You didn't know. But now, I need you to understand one more thing before the general arrives. Courage is not flashy. Leadership is not loud. Sometimes it's silent, and it's invisible, until a moment arrives when it must be everything." Jake nodded slowly. I think I understand, sir." Cole gave a faint smile, rare and almost imperceptible. "Good. That's all I ask." The next morning, the base was alive with preparation. The general would arrive for a full evaluation, including a simulated mission exercise designed to test the recruits' leadership, teamwork, and composure under pressure. Cole moved among the squads, adjusting collars, checking gear, and offering quiet advice. Unlike previous inspections, he didn't lecture. Instead, he asked questions, guided decisions, and let the recruits find the answers themselves. The older men knew this approach was deliberate. It forced them to think, adapt, and lead without relying on him. Jake's squad was assigned a hostage extraction simulation, a complex exercise involving strategic movement, communication, and split-second decisions. Initially, the recruits felt the pressure. They had trained for months, but this was the first time they were entirely on their own, with the sergeant observing but not intervening. Cole watched quietly from a distance, noting mistakes but allowing the team to correct them. He understood that true leadership could not be taught through orders alone. It had to be earned, experienced, and internalized. During the exercise, Jake made a miscalculation, sending his team into a simulated trap. The recruits hesitated, unsure of the next move. Sweat dripped down their faces and tension crackled in the air. Cole's voice came over the radio, calm but commanding. Assess, adapt, move together. Remember, no one is left behind. Jake took a deep breath and recalled the lessons from the hangar fire. He rallied his squad, reassigned positions, and coordinated their movements. Slowly, the team worked together, overcoming obstacles and achieving the objective. When the simulation ended, the recruits were exhausted, their clothes soaked with sweat. They had succeeded, but more importantly, they had learned to trust each other and themselves. Later, in the mess hall, the general addressed the unit. His eyes swept over the room, lingering on the soldiers who had once laughed at Cole and now followed his guidance with respect. "You've impressed me," General Briggs said. "Not for your ability to follow orders. Any recruit can do that. You've impressed me for your ability to lead, to adapt, and to think under pressure. That is the mark of a soldier." The room erupted in muted cheers, but all eyes were on Cole. The general continued, "And this man, Sergeant Raymond Cole, has been the catalyst for your growth. His patch is not just a symbol of his past. It is a symbol of what discipline, experience, and loyalty can achieve. Learn from him, respect him, and carry these lessons forward, always." Even Jake felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. The weight of the sergeant's history, the lessons endured, and the quiet heroism he had witnessed, all coalesced into a moment of clarity. Later, Jake approached Cole, hesitating. "Sir, I want to say thank you. For everything. For pushing us, teaching us, and for surviving so we could learn from you." Cole's expression softened. "You did the hard work, Jake. I just showed you the way. Remember this. You don't earn respect by demanding it. You earn it by living it, by showing it, and by standing by your word." Jake nodded, understanding at last. This was more than an inspection. It was a lesson in life, leadership, and honor. As the sun set over Fort Haven that evening, the recruits gathered around Cole's squad area, polishing their gear one last time under his watchful eye. The older men were no longer distant, quiet figures. They were mentors, examples, living proof of what courage looked like in practice. And Cole, standing among them, faded into the background, content to let his actions speak louder than words ever could. The patch on his sleeve glimmered faintly in the fading light, a testament to sacrifice, loyalty, and the invisible bonds of brotherhood. The morning sun rose over Fort Haven with a golden glow, warming the scorched earth where the hangar had once stood. A faint haze of smoke still lingered in the air, a reminder of the chaos that had tested every recruit, every soldier, and every ounce of training they had endured. Today was different. Today there were no alarms, no simulated missions, no shadows of fear. Today, the general would officially evaluate the unit and recognize those whose dedication and courage had proven exceptional. Sergeant Raymond Cole arrived early, as always. The patch on his sleeve glimmered in the sunlight, silver thread faintly catching the light. The recruits, now disciplined, focused, and quiet, stood in neat formations. The air was charged not with nervousness, but with anticipation. They were ready not just for the inspection, but for the world beyond it. Jake Miller stood near the front, eyes forward, heart steady. He thought back to the first day he had seen Cole polishing his boots, the laughter he had shared with his fellow recruits, and the shame that followed the general's recognition of the patch. That man, that veteran, had changed everything about the way Jake saw discipline, courage, and leadership. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the morning calm. Engines rumbled, metal squeaked, and the commanding presence of General Nathaniel Briggs stepped onto the grounds. His eyes scanned the formations, pausing briefly on each soldier before finally resting on Sergeant Cole. The general's face softened, recognition lighting his gaze. "Sergeant Cole," he said, voice steady and commanding, "I see the patch still shines as brightly as the men who earned it." Cole straightened, returning the salute. "Yes, sir." The general's attention then swept across the recruits. "I have observed the transformation in this unit over the past weeks. What you have achieved is not simply following orders. It is understanding what it means to lead, to support, and to carry the weight of responsibility for those beside you. That is the mark of true soldiers." As the general spoke, Jake felt a swelling pride for his squad, not in a boastful sense, but in the quiet confidence that came from enduring challenges together. Every recruit had grown under Cole's guidance, and they all knew it. The general moved closer to Cole, gesturing toward the recruits. This transformation could not have been possible without the guidance of one man. "Sergeant Cole, your service, leadership, and unwavering commitment to duty are an example to all who wear this uniform. For that, you are formally recognized." A hush fell over the yard. Cole, ever humble, simply nodded, returning the salute. The general continued, "Your past service with the Ghost Division, your courage during overseas operations, and your calm authority during the recent hangar fire have all demonstrated the essence of what it means to be a soldier." Jake's chest tightened. The memory of the night of the fire came rushing back, smoke, heat, fear, and Cole's calm voice guiding them through the chaos. Without him, many lives might have been lost. Now, the general was acknowledging that sacrifice, not just privately, but for everyone to witness. After the formalities, the general addressed the recruits once more. "Remember this. A leader earns trust by example, courage by action, and respect by how they treat others. Sergeant Cole has shown you all what that truly means. Let it guide you through every challenge you face." With the inspection complete, the recruits returned to their quarters, buzzing quietly with the lessons they had internalized. Even the youngest soldiers moved with purpose, no longer distracted by ego or fear. They had learned that leadership was earned, not demanded, and courage was not about the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Later that afternoon, Jake approached Cole once more, this time not with questions, but with gratitude. "Sir," he said, voice steady, "thank you. For everything. For showing us the right way, for believing in us, and for surviving so we could learn from you." Cole looked at him, eyes calm, but filled with unspoken emotion. "You all did the hard work, Jake. I only showed you the way. Remember this, the patch I wear isn't about me. It's about those who can't wear it anymore. Carry their memory forward in everything you do." Jake nodded. He understood now. The patch, the medals, the history, it wasn't just a symbol of past glory. It was a promise, a legacy, and a reminder of the cost of courage. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Cole walked through the training yard one last time before returning to his quarters. The recruits watched silently, many still polishing their gear, others reflecting on the lessons they had absorbed. Jake paused to look at the veteran, noticing how the older man's silhouette seemed both ordinary and extraordinary at once. There was no grandeur, no showmanship, just a man who had endured the worst the world could offer and returned with a quiet strength that inspired everyone around him. In that moment, Jake understood something he had never realized before. Courage wasn't loud. Leadership didn't need recognition. Respect wasn't demanded. They were earned quietly, steadily, and often in the moments no one else noticed. As darkness fell over Fort Haven, the patch on Cole's sleeve caught the fading light one last time. It was more than silver thread. It was history, sacrifice, and an unbroken chain of duty reaching across generations. And in the barracks, Jake and the others felt it, the invisible weight of honor, the lessons of courage, and the enduring example of the man they had once laughed at, but who had become the heart of their transformation. Sergeant Cole did not look back as he disappeared into his quarters. He did not need to. The patch told the story. The recruits would carry the lessons forward. And that, more than medals or recognition, was the true mark of a soldier. As night settled over the base, the recruits lay down, exhausted but changed. They had faced fire, fear, and the weight of their own inexperience, and they had survived, guided by the quiet wisdom of a veteran who had already lived through the worst. Tomorrow, they would rise as soldiers. But tonight, they rested in the shadow of a man whose past had shaped their present, whose calm courage had taught them to stand tall, and whose patch would forever remain a symbol of the lessons that no training manual could ever teach. The story of the patch, the lessons, and the man behind it would live on, not just in reports or records, but in the hearts of every recruit who had learned to see beyond fear, arrogance, and laughter to the quiet, enduring strength of true heroism. And with that, the legacy of Sergeant Raymond Cole, and the patch he wore with silent pride, was secured.